When my own flesh and blood called me a backward Mexican fool and kicked me out of the family farm my grandfather built with his bare hands, I thought my life was over. I was 62, homeless, sleeping in a trailer park, surviving on $43 a night. But here's what my tech-savvy son didn't know about this worthless old farmer. I was about to revolutionize American agriculture and build an empire that would make his pathetic startup dreams look like child's play. 9 years later, he's bankrupt and desperate. I own the most expensive house in Austin, and when he showed up begging for help, I gave him exactly what he gave me, absolutely nothing. Before I tell you how a homeless farmer became a $12 million empire builder, comment below and tell me, have you ever been thrown away by family? Let's dive into this incredible journey. My name is Lucian Graves, and at 71 years old, I've learned that sometimes the cruelest betrayals come wrapped in the voices of people who share your blood. It was March 15th, 2015, when my world came crashing down on our 50-acre family farm in Travis County, Texas. "Lucian, we need to talk," David announced that morning, his voice carrying that cold, professional tone he'd learned in his software engineering job. Jennifer stood behind him, arms crossed, wearing that designer blazer that probably cost more than I spent on seeds in a month. "This arrangement isn't working anymore," Jennifer announced, stepping forward like she owned the conversation. "You're too set in your old ways, Lucian. You're just a dirty Mexican farmer who never understood the real world." The words hit me like a physical blow, from my own daughter-in-law's mouth, spoken like a curse word. I looked at David, waiting for him to defend me, to remember that I was the man who had raised him alone after his mother died. Instead, he avoided my eyes like I was some stranger asking for spare change. "Dad, I'm ashamed to tell people my father works with dirt like some illegal immigrant," he said, his voice getting stronger as Jennifer nodded. "Jennifer's friends can't even come over because they're embarrassed by you. You're exactly why people look down on Mexicans." "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, my voice smaller than a man who had survived 62 years should ever sound. "That's not our problem anymore," Jennifer replied with a shrug that would haunt me for years. "You're a grown man. Figure it out." David picked up my farming tools and threw them into the dirt with shocking violence. "Take your peasant tools and get out of my property," he spat. "You smell like dirt and failure, Dad. Grandpa was a fool for staying poor, and you're a fool for following him." 20 minutes later, my entire life fit into the back of my old pickup truck. 62 years of memories reduced to what I could carry. The rest would go to Goodwill, Jennifer informed me cheerfully. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," David mumbled as he watched me load my truck. For a split second, I saw a flicker of the little boy who used to help me plant seeds. Then Jennifer appeared beside him, and his face went blank again. I climbed into my truck without looking back, not because I was strong, but because I was shattered. As I drove away from the land that had been in my family for 3 generations, I had $1,200 in my wallet, no job, and nowhere to live. What I didn't have was the slightest idea that this humiliation would become the foundation for the greatest comeback story of my life. Sometimes the people who throw you away like garbage don't realize they're actually setting you free to discover what you're truly worth. The Sunset Vista Trailer Park on East Austin's roughest street became my home for the next 2 months. And let me tell you, it was exactly as glamorous as it sounds. $43 a night for a rusted aluminum box that smelled like industrial cleaner and broken dreams, but it had a roof and a door that locked. After being thrown away like trash by my own son, even that felt like a luxury. The elderly park manager, Mrs. Rodriguez, took pity on me after the first week. "You're not like our usual guests," she said quietly, sliding an extra towel across the counter of her tiny office. Most residents were either construction workers between jobs or people hiding from something. I was just hiding from the truth that my own flesh and blood had discarded me like yesterday's garbage. Those first mornings were the hardest. I'd wake up in that narrow bed, forgetting for just a moment where I was, and then reality would hit like a slap. No grandchildren's laughter, no family breakfast to prepare, just me and the broken air conditioning unit that made sounds like a dying whale. But here's what David and Jennifer didn't count on. I'm not the kind of man who stays down. Never have been. When David was young and we had nothing after his mother died, I worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. I cleaned offices at night, did construction during the day, and fixed neighbors' equipment on weekends. Survival wasn't new to me. I'd just forgotten how good I was at it. The first thing I did was walk to the East Austin Community Center every morning. Free internet, free air conditioning, and most importantly, free access to job listings. At 62, nobody was exactly lining up to hire me. But I wasn't looking for charity. I was looking for opportunity. That's where I met Maria Santos, A community organizer with dirt under her fingernails and a no-nonsense attitude I immediately respected. She was helping other displaced families navigate Austin's changing landscape, and something about my story resonated with her. "Lucian, you know what this city needs?" she asked during our third coffee conversation. "Real food. Authentic food. Not this fake farm-to-table nonsense that costs $20 for a salad." She introduced me to Austin's weekend farmers markets, places where local chefs came hunting for ingredients that would set their restaurants apart. I started small, growing tomatoes and peppers in plastic containers outside my trailer, using techniques my grandfather had taught me 60 years ago. The first time I set up a tiny booth at the East Side Farmers Market, I felt ridiculous. Here I was, a homeless man selling vegetables from plastic buckets, surrounded by vendors with fancy displays and organic certifications. But when people tasted my tomatoes, something magical happened. "These are incredible," said a woman with chef's whites peeking out from under her jacket. "Where did you learn to grow like this?" "My grandfather," I replied simply. 3 generations of knowledge." She handed me her business card. "Elena Rodriguez, executive chef and owner, Verde Kitchen." "Mr. Graves, I need to talk to you about supplying my restaurants." I stared at the card, hardly believing what I was hearing. After 2 months of feeling worthless, someone was asking for my help. Someone saw value in what David had called peasant work. "I don't understand," I said. "I'm just growing vegetables in containers behind a trailer." Elena smiled, and for the first time since March, I felt something that resembled hope stirring in my chest. "Mr. Graves, I think you're about to discover that sometimes the best things grow in the most unexpected places. You want to supply my restaurants with vegetables grown in plastic containers?" Elena Rodriguez asked the next Tuesday, looking at me across the table of her flagship restaurant, Verde Kitchen. "I want to try," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I need to understand what you're really looking for." Elena leaned forward, her eyes lighting up with passion. "Lucian, Austin's restaurant scene is exploding, but we're all fighting for the same limited supply of local produce. What if I told you the future of food isn't in rural farms, but right here in the city?" She pulled out her phone and showed me pictures that made my head spin. Vegetables growing in stacked towers inside warehouses, lettuce flourishing under LED lights, tomatoes hanging from systems that looked more like science fiction than agriculture. "This is called urban farming," Elena explained. "Vertical growing systems, hydroponic technology. You can grow more food in a 1,000-square-foot warehouse than most people grow on 5 acres of farmland." I stared at the images, my mind racing. "But I'm just an old farmer who grows things in dirt." "Exactly," Elena said with a smile. "You understand plants in a way these tech guys never will. That's not something you can learn from YouTube videos." That afternoon, Elena introduced me to Tommy Chen, a 28-year-old former software developer who'd traded his coding career for growing lettuce in a converted warehouse in East Austin. "Mr. Graves," Tommy said, shaking my hand with dirt-stained fingers, "Elena tells me you've got magic hands with tomatoes." The warehouse was filled with towering metal structures, each level packed with thriving vegetables under purple LED lights. Water flowed through tubes, feeding nutrients directly to the plant roots. It was nothing like the farming I'd known, yet somehow it felt familiar. "How much can you grow in here?" I asked. "About the same as a 10-acre traditional farm," Tommy replied. "But here's the thing, I can build the systems, but I don't have the intuition. I don't know why some plants thrive and others struggle." I approached one of his tomato towers and immediately saw the problem. "Your plants are stressed," I said, touching a yellowing leaf. "They're getting too much nitrogen. In traditional farming, we'd call this burning the roots." Tommy's eyes widened. "How did you know that just by looking?" 62 years of watching plants talk to me," I replied. Then something clicked in my mind, a connection between everything I'd learned from my grandfather and everything I was seeing in this warehouse. I looked around again, but this time I wasn't seeing foreign technology. I was seeing potential, unlimited potential. "I'm thinking that David was wrong about farming being dead," I said slowly. "I'm thinking farming just needed to evolve." Tommy practically bounced with excitement. "Mr. Graves, would you consider partnering with me? I'll handle the technology, you handle the growing wisdom." For the first time since March, I felt something more powerful than hope stirring in my chest. I felt purpose. "Tommy, I think I know how to grow more food in less space than anyone's ever imagined." 6 months later, I stood in our converted warehouse space, staring at tomato plants that defied everything I thought I knew about agriculture. These weren't just growing, they were thriving beyond anything I'd achieved in 60 years of traditional farming. "Lucian, this is impossible," Tommy said. holding a clipboard full of yield calculations. We're producing 3 times more per square foot than any urban farm in Texas. How are you doing this? The answer was simple, but the execution had taken decades to perfect. I'd combined my grandfather's old world techniques with Tommy's high-tech systems. While other urban farmers relied purely on computer algorithms, I watched the plants themselves. I adjusted nutrient levels based on leaf color, modified light cycles according to plant behavior, and treated each tower like a living ecosystem rather than a production machine. You listen to what the plants are telling you, I explained, adjusting the nutrient flow to a section of struggling lettuce. Technology can feed them, but only experience can understand them. Word spread quickly through Austin's restaurant community. Elena's Verdi Kitchen became our first major success story, featuring our produce and dishes that food critics couldn't stop raving about. Soon other high-end restaurants were calling, begging for access to what they called Grave's miracle vegetables. By month 8, we'd expanded to 3 warehouse locations and hired 6 employees, all eager to learn what I'd started calling intuitive agriculture. Maria Santos, who'd become like a sister to me, helped coordinate with the Hispanic community, and many of our workers were people who'd been written off by the traditional job market. Lucian, you're not just growing vegetables, Maria told me during one of our weekly coffee meetings. You're growing hope for people who thought they'd been forgotten. The real breakthrough came when Austin Food and Wine magazine sent a reporter to investigate the mysterious farmer whose produce was transforming the city's culinary scene. The journalist, a young woman named Sarah Kim, spent 3 days shadowing me through the warehouses. Mr. Graves, she said on her final day, I've covered agriculture for 5 years, but I've never seen anything like this. You're not just farming, you're revolutionizing how America thinks about food production. The article, titled The Homeless Farmer Who's Feeding Austin's Future, hit newsstands in January 2017. The photograph on the cover showed me standing between towering tomato plants, my weathered hands holding vegetables that looked too perfect to be real. Within a week, my phone was ringing nonstop. Restaurant owners from Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio wanted to know if I could supply their kitchens. Urban farming consultants offered to pay me thousands of dollars just to tour their facilities and share my techniques. But the call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning from a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Graves, this is David Chen from Whole Foods Market's regional headquarters, the voice said. We've been following your work, and we'd like to discuss a potential partnership. Are you available to meet with our sustainability team next week? I set down the phone and looked around the warehouse that had become my kingdom. 6 months ago, I'd been sleeping in a trailer, dismissed as a worthless old man. Now, Whole Foods wanted to partner with me. Sometimes the sweetest victories are the ones nobody sees coming. 3 years later, standing in the conference room of Whole Foods regional headquarters in Dallas, I could hardly believe the words coming out of my mouth. Gentlemen, Graves Urban Farms can supply your Texas locations with consistent, year-round produce at 30% below your current costs, I said, clicking to the next slide. Our vertical farming systems produce harvests every 6 weeks, regardless of weather or season. The executives around the mahogany table leaned forward with interest. These were people who controlled food distribution for millions of customers, and they were hanging on every word from a man who'd been homeless just 3 years earlier. Mr. Graves, said the regional director, your quality metrics are unlike anything we've seen. How do you maintain such consistency? Simple, I replied. Technology handles the mechanics, but human wisdom handles the soul of growing. By 2018, Graves Urban Farms operated 12 facilities across Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. We employed over 60 people, most from communities that traditional agriculture had forgotten. Tommy had become my business partner, handling technology, while I focused on training our plant whisperers. The Whole Foods contract alone generated $2.4 million in annual revenue, but that was just the beginning. Food Network wanted to film a documentary. Harvard Business School invited me to speak about disruptive agriculture innovation. The USDA asked me to consult on urban farming initiatives. Lucian, do you realize what you've built? Maria asked during one of our weekly dinners. She'd become our community outreach coordinator. You're not just feeding people, you're changing how America thinks about farming. The recognition felt surreal. I'd gone from being called a dirty Mexican farmer to being featured in Entrepreneur magazine as one of America's most innovative agricultural leaders. The same techniques David had dismissed as peasant work were now being studied by universities nationwide. The breakthrough came when Dr. Elena Vasquez from the University of Texas called, Mr. Graves, "We'd like to offer you an honorary position as a visiting agricultural consultant," she said. "Your methods are revolutionizing how we teach sustainable farming. Would you consider developing a curriculum?" I accepted immediately. The idea that knowledge passed down from my grandfather would now be taught in universities felt like ultimate vindication. The speaking engagements multiplied. I addressed conferences in Chicago, presented at food innovation summits in California, consulted for urban farming projects in cities I'd never dreamed of visiting. Each presentation began the same way. 3 years ago, I was living in a trailer park, thrown away by my own family. Today, I want to tell you how generational wisdom can transform the future of food. The magazine cover that changed everything arrived on a Tuesday morning in September 2019. Sustainable Business Weekly featured me as their cover story. From Homeless to Harvest King, how Lucian Graves built America's most profitable urban farm empire. Tommy found me staring at the magazine in our main warehouse office, my weathered face looking back at me from the glossy cover. "Lucian," he said quietly, "your son is going to see this." I nodded, thinking about David for the first time in months. Somewhere in Austin, the man who'd called me a failure was about to discover that his peasant father had become a millionaire. The irony was perfect. David had thrown me away because he was ashamed of being associated with a Mexican farmer. Now that same farmer was on magazine covers, speaking at Harvard, and building an agricultural empire that would make David's failed tech dreams look like pocket change. The phone call that would transform my life forever came 6 months after the magazine cover, from an investment firm in New York I'd never heard of. "Mr. Graves, this is Rebecca Chen from Greenfield Capital," the voice said. "We specialize in sustainable agriculture investments, and we'd like to discuss funding your national expansion. Are you interested in an $8 million investment round?" $8 million. I had to sit down. 2 months later, I found myself in a Manhattan boardroom, signing papers that would make Graves Urban Farms a nationwide operation. The investors wanted to establish facilities in 20 major cities within 2 years. They saw the potential I'd only dreamed about, turning my grandfather's wisdom into a coast-to-coast revolution. "Mr. Graves," Rebecca said as we shook hands, "you're about to become one of the most influential figures in American agriculture." With the investment secured, Tommy and I began planning our expansion. But first, I had a personal decision to make. After 4 years of living modestly, reinvesting every dollar back into the business, I finally had enough money to buy something I'd been dreaming about since that horrible day in March. The Westlake Hills mansion sat on 5 acres overlooking Austin, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city that had once rejected me. The realtor, a polished woman in her 40s, seemed surprised when I made a cash offer. "Mr. Graves, this property is $4.2 million, she said carefully. "Are you certain about the financing?" "Cash," I repeated, pulling out my phone to show her my bank balance. Her eyes widened. 3 weeks later, I stood in the master bedroom of my new home, looking out at the city sprawling below me. Somewhere down there was the trailer park where I'd spent those desperate first months. Somewhere down there was David's modest house, the same house he'd kicked me out of to preserve his image. The irony was delicious. David had thrown me away because he was ashamed of his dirty Mexican farmer father. Now that same father owned the most expensive house in the neighborhood David had always dreamed of living in. I walked out onto the massive stone balcony, breathing in the evening air. The pool sparkled below, surrounded by professionally landscaped gardens that would have made my grandfather proud. In the distance, Austin's skyline twinkled with the lights of restaurants that served my vegetables, of businesses that had grown because of the jobs I'd created. My phone buzzed with a text from Maria. "Saw your house in the Austin Business Journal. You magnificent man. Champagne celebration this weekend?" I smiled, typing back. "Bring the good stuff. We're toasting to new beginnings." But even as I celebrated this incredible milestone, I knew the story wasn't complete. David and Jennifer were still out there, probably still convinced they'd made the right choice 4 years ago. They had no idea that the man they'd discarded like garbage now owned an empire worth more than they'd ever imagined. Tomorrow, I'd continue building my legacy. Tonight, I'd simply enjoy the view from the top, knowing that sometimes the best revenge really is living well. The homeless farmer had become the harvest king, and Austin would never look the same. Meanwhile, across town in his modest 3-bedroom house, David Graves was staring at foreclosure papers with shaking hands. His tech startup had burned through 2 years of investor money before collapsing when their main product failed to launch. "David, we have to do something," Jennifer said, pacing their living room like a caged animal. "The bank wants an answer by Friday, and we're 3 months behind on the mortgage." "I know," David snapped, throwing the papers onto their coffee table. The same table they'd bought with money from selling his father's farming equipment 4 years earlier. "My severance runs out next month, and no one's hiring 40-year-old failed entrepreneurs." The irony was crushing. David had thrown his father out because farming was dead. Now his tech dreams lay in ruins while he faced the very homelessness he'd forced on his own father. Jennifer picked up her laptop, frantically searching job listings. "There has to be something." She stopped mid-sentence, staring at her screen with a strange expression. "David," she said slowly, "come look at this." David walked over, expecting another job listing. Instead, he saw a headline that made his blood freeze: "Austin Farmer Builds $12 million Agriculture Empire." The photograph showed a man in expensive clothes standing in a high-tech warehouse. A man David recognized despite the confident smile. "That's your father," Jennifer whispered. David's hands trembled as he read aloud. "Lucian Graves, once homeless, has built the most successful urban farming operation in the Southwest. His company now operates in 15 cities and supplies Whole Foods Market." "This can't be the same man," Jennifer said, but her voice lacked conviction. "The dirty Mexican farmer we threw out?" David clicked on another article, "From Trailer Park to Mansion, the Lucian Graves Success Story." The photo showed a stunning Westlake Hills estate, with the caption, "Graves recently purchased this $4.2 million home with cash." $4.2 million, David repeated numbly. "In cash." Jennifer scrolled frantically, finding more headlines. Harvard Business School features Graves' urban farms. Austin's agricultural millionaire proves farming isn't dead. Each headline felt like a slap. The man they'd called a failure was now on magazine covers and speaking at universities. "He's famous," Jennifer said, her voice barely a whisper. "And rich. Really, really rich." David stared at a video interview where his father spoke confidently about combining generational wisdom with modern technology. The same wisdom David had dismissed as backward thinking. "We have to go see him," Jennifer said suddenly. "We have to apologize. Ask for help." David wanted to refuse, but the foreclosure papers made the decision for him. His pride had cost him everything once. "He'll never forgive us," David said. "Not after what we said." Jennifer grabbed his arm desperately. "We threw out a man who became a millionaire. Maybe he'll understand we were young and stupid." David looked at his father's mansion photo, then at his foreclosure notice. The man he'd called a failure now owned an empire, while the son who'd thought himself superior was about to lose everything. "Fine," he said quietly. "We'll go see him. But don't expect miracles, Jennifer. Some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt." The doorbell at my Westlake Hills mansion rang at 10:30 on a Saturday morning, exactly 1 week after David's foreclosure story hit the local news. Through my security monitor, I saw them standing at my front gate like desperate salespeople. David looked older, grayer, wearing khakis that screamed financial desperation. Jennifer stood beside him in a blazer that probably represented their last attempt at maintaining appearances. Both stared up at my mansion with pure, undiluted shock. I took my time walking to the front gate. 9 years of silence, and they show up the day after discovering I'm rich. The timing was perfectly predictable. "Hello, David." "Jennifer," I said, not opening the gate. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" "Dad," David's voice cracked. "We read about your success. We wanted to congratulate you." "Congratulations delivered," I replied calmly. "Anything else?" Jennifer stepped forward with that fake smile I remembered. "Lucian, we know things ended badly. We've had time to reflect, and we realize we handled everything wrong." "Handled everything wrong," I repeated slowly. "Is that what we're calling it?" David looked desperate. "Dad, I was wrong. I was young and stupid. We need to talk. Can we please come in?" "Talk about what exactly?" Jennifer's mask slipped, revealing the calculating woman underneath. "We're family, Lucian, and family should stick together, especially when there's room for everyone." There it was. The real reason for their visit. "How convenient that you've discovered your family feelings now that I have a $12 million empire," I said. "That's not fair," David protested. "We've missed you. We made mistakes." I laughed at the absurdity. "David, you called me a dirty Mexican farmer. You said you were ashamed to tell people I was your father. Jennifer said I wasn't civilized enough for your world. Now, you miss me?" David couldn't look at me. We were stressed. "We didn't mean—" "You meant every word," I interrupted. "You said I was exactly why people look down on Mexicans. You threw my farming tools in the dirt and called me a peasant. You made me homeless at 62 because you were embarrassed by your own blood." Jennifer tried manipulation. "Lucian, We're facing financial difficulties. With all your success, maybe you could help family get back on their feet. The same family that told me figuring out my life wasn't their problem anymore. I looked at both of them begging for scraps from the man they'd discarded like garbage. Here's the thing, I said, my voice calm but final. You called me a dirty Mexican farmer who never understood the real world. Well, this dirty farmer now owns the real world you wanted to join. And you're not welcome in it. Dad, please, David begged. We're going to lose everything. Good, I replied without hesitation. Maybe losing everything will teach you what I learned when you threw me away. Maybe you'll discover what you're actually worth when you have to build it from nothing. I turned toward my mansion, then paused. You wanted me gone when I was worth nothing. Now that I'm worth millions, you can stay gone. Some doors, once closed, should never be reopened. The gate remained locked. Justice had been served cold, and it tasted perfect. That evening, I stood alone on my stone balcony, watching the sunset paint the Austin skyline in shades of gold and crimson. 9 years. 9 years since that March morning when my own son threw me away like yesterday's garbage. 9 years of building myself from nothing into something they could never have imagined. The silence felt different now. Not the painful silence of abandonment, but the peaceful silence of a man who had finally closed a chapter that needed closing. My phone buzzed with messages from Tommy, Maria, and Elena, all celebrating another successful week for Graves Urban Farms. Our latest facility in Phoenix had exceeded production targets by 20%. Harvard wanted to schedule another speaking engagement. 3 more cities were requesting feasibility studies for new locations. But tonight, none of that mattered as much as the decision I'd made at my front gate. People always talk about forgiveness like it's some noble obligation, as if withholding it makes you the villain in your own story. But here's what I learned in those 9 years of building my empire from the ashes of their betrayal. Some betrayals are so deep, so fundamentally cruel, that forgiveness isn't healing, it's just enabling. David didn't call me a dirty Mexican farmer in a moment of anger. He said it with calculated cruelty, designed to cut me where it would hurt the most. Jennifer didn't accidentally suggest I wasn't civilized enough for their world. She meant to humiliate me, to make me feel small and worthless. They succeeded, for a while, but the beautiful thing about being thrown away is that it forces you to discover what you're actually made of. When people stop believing in you, you either crumble or you prove them spectacularly wrong. I chose the latter. Standing here in my $4 million home, looking out at the city where my vegetables feed thousands of families, where my techniques are taught in universities, where my story inspires other people who've been discarded by their own families, I realized something profound. I didn't build this empire to win them back. I built it to prove to myself that their judgment of my worth was the biggest mistake they'd ever make. David and Jennifer wanted me gone when I was worth nothing. Now that I'm worth millions, they can stay gone. Not because I'm cruel, but because I've learned the difference between forgiveness and self-respect. Some people deserve second chances. Others deserve to live with the consequences of their choices. My grandfather used to tell me that the strongest trees are the ones that grow in the harshest soil. He was right. The cruelty that broke me also made me. The son who threw me away gave me the greatest gift he could have given, the motivation to become everything he said I'd never be. 9 years ago, I was a homeless old man with $1,200 and a broken heart. Tonight, I'm a millionaire with an empire, surrounded by people who see my worth without needing to be convinced of it. That's not revenge. That's justice. If you're watching this and you've been thrown away by people who should have loved you, remember this. Their opinion of your worth says everything about them and nothing about you. Sometimes the best thing someone can do for you is get out of your way so you can discover what you're truly capable of.